Hello, my name is Anton Woodward. I've been a stage automation engineer for just over 30 years. I normally give these presentations every year in person, but this year, because of the 2020 coronavirus pandemic, I'm going to give it by YouTube instead. So at the end, when we would normally have a sort of question and answer session, I invite you to pose any questions on the YouTube site. Thank you. What is stage automation? Well, stage automation is the appliance of electronic control systems to move scenery and rigging equipment. So we can control the position, the speed, the acceleration, deceleration of scenery. Okay, what can be automated? Automation falls into generally two areas, what I call the overstage and the understage. So the overstage would be things like power flying, scenery, lighting bars, performer flying, that sort of thing. And then the understage would be things like the stage lifts, elevators, traps, trucks, wagons and revolves, that sort of thing. There are other things that can be automated as well. Another common thing that I get involved with is orchestra elevators, which is all about adapting the stage. So an orchestra elevator, for instance, could be level with the stage, so you get a much bigger stage, or it could be level with the auditorium, so you get a bigger auditorium, put some more seats in, or drop it down some more and create a big orchestra pit. I'm going to show a series of videos now that we would normally do as part of our PowerPoint presentation. So the first video I'm going to show you is an example of Overstage, which is power flying. So in this example, it's a 60 power flying bars in a theatre in Kuwait at the Bayham Palace. And although you can see I've just been messing around, testing, seeing what we can do with it, you'll get the idea. Each of the bars that you see are capable of moving 500 kilos, and ordinarily, of course, they would have scenery on them. Right, the next example is an example of understage automation. So the first video I'm going to show you is a triple revolve. This was done for the Farm Pavilions, a show at the Shaftesbury Theatre quite a few years ago now. And in it you'll see 3 revolves. At one point of the video they're all synchronised, staying together, and another part they're going off in opposite directions, doing their own thing. And there's a couple of sliders and a headpiece header that you can see in the video as well. But mainly it's an example of understage machinery. The second understage machinery video I want to show you is a double revolve, which is for only fools and horses at the Theatre Royal Haymarket, currently in London. And this is being used quite effectively to do a scene change from the trotter's flat into the nag's head and back again. It goes backwards and forwards between the two scenes throughout the show. But it's quite an effective use of two revolves being used quite simply, but quite effective. And the last understage machinery one I want to show you is from Groundhog Day. This video is taken in the rehearsal room and is 5 revolves. So there's 3 revolves on top of a revolve, and then that revolve is on top of another revolve. And the idea was to be able to move pieces of scenery in a straight line across the stage using a combination of revolves. It's quite a bit of clever programming on the part of the operators to get this to work, but it work it did. So I'd like to show you that. Another reason we would use automation is purely for the wow factor, to give the audience a little bit of a thrill. So this example is the chandelier in Phantom of the Opera. This example is from Buenos Aires in Argentina from a few years ago, and here we're moving about half a ton over the audience and crashing it onto stage. Obviously lots of safety interlocks involved with all of that, but a good use of automation. Another area that automation is used in is in the film industry. So we use it for stunt rigging and for doing camera shots. So the first video I'm going to show you is a stunt shot. This is for a Bollywood film, got involved with a few years back, where we're flying an actor up the side of, or a stuntman I should say, up the side of Battersea Power Station. In the first part of the video you can see all the ropes and the crane and all the rest of it, and then through the magic of CGI they removed all of that afterwards. But the point is, he really was flying up the side of the Battersea Power Station using automation. And the second example is camera rigging. So in this example we're moving the camera to produce an effect. So this was for the X-Men film, and basically it looks like the actor is flying towards the camera and then he turns away, whereas what actually happened was the camera was flying towards him. He was actually stationary. It's filmed in a car park with some green screen behind him. He's in a truss and the camera is controlled from above and is flying towards his face, and then he's in this truss and he sort of turns away at the last minute and it looks like he's flying towards the camera and then just veers off. And that was an example of automation being used to control a camera in the film world. So, why use stage automation? Well, I've gone over some of the reasons now, so we'll just recap on these. So, there's the wow factor is a good reason to use it. So, the phantom chandelier is the example that I gave you. But you know, there's the Miss Saigon helicopter, there's the car in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, there's the flying nanny in Mary Poppins. They're all good uses of automation to produce a wow factor. Sometimes there's no alternative. If you're going to move tons of scenery, then it has to be automated because it's just too big and heavy to be moved any other way. One of the selling points, if you like, about automation is you get very good repeatability and precision that could argue that a flyman couldn't give you. And certainly when you're moving several pieces together and you want them to stay together, you want synchronicity, and it's all got to look really lovely as it comes in. Trying to get 2 or 3 flymen to do that is actually quite difficult. Much more easily achieved through automation. Then there comes the cost and time management aspect of automation, where if you've got a single operator controlling a large number of pieces, well, that actually starts to work out advantageous from the producer's point of view to employ one automation operator instead of several stagehands. So you then start looking at the total cost of the ownership of an automation system. Obviously you've got the big upfront capital costs to put it in place in the first place, but then you get things like faster changeovers, so you get more time on stage for the actors, etc., to do their thing. You can improve health and safety because people aren't lifting heavy weights and doing their backs in, all the rest, that sort of thing. So there's a reduction in manual handling. Then you can have safety systems in place like safe edge and emergency stops, etc. So I would argue that it's actually safer generally than moving things by hand. Then the other reason why you might want to use stage automation is to keep up with the competition. The example I always like to give is the King's Theatre in Southsea. For years and years and years, it was a hemp house, an old Frank Matcham type theatre, lovely theatre, but it couldn't take in the big touring shows that were going around the country because they had no automation. So in their wisdom they decided to fit automation back in the, I think it was about 2005 or something like that, quite a while ago now. They automated 6 flying bars to start with and then another 6 later on. And by that they were then able to get the big touring shows that were going around the country, was then able to visit Southsea. And so the people of Southsea get to see the big shows, they don't have to travel to Southampton anymore. That's a big plus for automation, I would say. So what exactly is required? Well, that depends on whether you're putting in automation for a performance or for a venue. So obviously for performance it's dictated by the specific show and the creative effects that are wanted for that show. Whereas for a venue it's going to be dependent on the type of venue. Is there a full fly tower? Can you fly scenery in and out? What are the operational benefits for load in, load out, etc. If you're in a, say, a repertory house, then the benefits of automation are pretty clear because you can change over the shows very quickly. A venue that's got the same show in for weeks, months or years, well then perhaps not so much. Automation required for the venue, but it might be needed for the show that's in there at the time. So there's other things to consider when you're deciding what's required is the big one is weight. How much weight have you got to move? Because the more weight you've got to lift or shift along the floor or whatever, it is bigger motors, and bigger motors mean more money because everything gets bigger, including the cost. Then the other thing to consider is the speed that you want to move things at, because again the faster you want to move something, the bigger the motor is, the bigger the gearbox is, the more money you're going to spend. So they need to be taken into account, because there's very little point putting in an automation system that can't lift the weight that you need it to lift or can't move at the speeds you want to move at. Complete waste of time and money to go down that route. So what you really need to do and think about, if you're limited on budget, you're best off having less automation, but it does what you want it to do, and then perhaps invest some more later on further down the line, rather than trying to put in lowering the specification of what you want, and you end up with something that won't lift what you want it to do and won't do the speed that you want it to do. Why bother? Then you need to think about how much power is required, because automation does use a lot of power, and not all buildings have the power available to do it. So that's another consideration that needs to be thought about. Sometimes when you're wandering around the West End, around the backs of the theatres, you can see these generators all boarded off around the backs of theatres, and that's generally because the building itself hasn't got enough power in the building to power everything. So extra power has to be brought in. So you often see generators out the backs of the buildings running during the shows, or sometimes they're up on the roof. You don't always see them. Then there is, can the buildings accommodate the system? Some of the theatres, especially in the West End, are pretty old, and the structures are a bit crumbly, the foundations, etc. The roof structures, etc. Often they need to be beefed up in order to take the automation. I certainly remember when we did Billy Elliot at the Palace Theatre in Victoria, an awful lot of steelwork had to go in to support the building so that it could take the automation, or the stresses that the automation were going to put on the building. And lastly, you need to think about the noise level. What type of venue is it? Is noise going to be a problem, either for the audience or the performance, or further afield? So there's a lot to think about. Okay, show automation. So first of all I'm going to show you a little clip from the show automation that was on Billy Elliot, the one I just described in fact. So in here there's a lift that comes out of the stage. Well, first of all there's a drop and slide that opens up the stage, allows the Billy house to come out, and for that an extra 4 metres had to be dug out the basement right next door to Victoria Station. Imagine how difficult that was. And it's rotating, etc. It comes up through the floor. Then you'll see it go back down again. You'll see the drop and slide come in with another drop and slide inside the first drop and slide to allow the bed to sit on stage on its own at the end, and then the bed goes down and then the drop and slide shuts, and then you'll also see another drop and slide with the kitchen table coming up.
Right-o.
Down to bed with the table top coming off, okay?
Okay.
Okay. Alright. Going down and coming up, go now.
Show automation. Things to think about when you're putting on a show. If you're production manager, technical manager, whatever, things that you need to think about. Right. First one, timescales. Automation takes time to design and build and put together. Yes, some of it is on the shelf, but a lot of it isn't. So some off-the-shelf stuff, maybe a simple revolve, some curtain tracks, yes, but there isn't a Billy Elliot control system sitting on the shelf waiting to be hired. It has to be built. And you've got to think about the timescales, how long it takes to get everything in, the delivery of components. 8 to 12 weeks is normal lead time for motors and gearboxes, and that's not including August. August, a lot of the motor gearboxes come from Italy. Italy have a big shutdown, so that's 8 to 12 weeks, not including August. Other thing to think about is which automation supplier are you going to use? I'm just one, there are others. So you need to look at their experience and expertise in putting together a stage automation system. Are the timescales realistic? That's what I was first saying. The price shouldn't be the number one consideration. How easy it is to use the user interface. We'll talk more about that later. The after sales service, will they come out, will they answer the phone call at 6 o'clock on Saturday evening if there's a problem? What training is available? What health and safety standards they're working to? So they're all things you need to think about as far as the automation supplier goes. Next you need to think about purchase or rental, and that there are pros and cons to both. First of all, when it comes to rental, is it even available? Is the first thing you might need to ask yourself. But beyond that, it might be the length of the run. So you're doing a fairly short run of just a few weeks or a few months or something, then rental is probably your best option because it is expensive equipment. But if you're planning to run for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, then almost certainly purchase is the better option, albeit you've got to put the money in place to start with. But over the longer run, that would probably make more sense. So, and then you've got to identify the requirements of your show. So the designer will come up with various ideas, concepts of what they want, and then me as a stage automation engineer, I've got to turn that into reality. What is feasible and what isn't, what can be afforded, what can't be afforded, and how we're going to produce the scenic effects using automation. So that will require meetings, a chat perhaps with the designer, a site visit to theatre, see what we're working with, all those sorts of things. Once we've built it and designed it and all the rest of it, and it comes along, it's the installation and the testing. We need time to get the stuff in. It's quite difficult putting in automation and stage equipment because generally we need the stage almost all to ourselves, at least for some of the time. Trying to work around, the other trades, the sound and the light and all the rest of it is difficult because if the floor's got to come up, we can't have people walking all over it whilst we're trying to do all that. And so it is difficult. Time needs to be made for the automation people, stage engineering people to do their thing, and to try it and not allow for that time ends in tears. It doesn't work. Then you need to think about who are the staff that are going to use the equipment. Do they have the experience or not? Are they going to need to be trained? Nowadays there are quite a lot of automation operators out there that have worked on various shows. Hasn't always been like this. Years ago, almost every automation operator was the first time they'd ever done it. Now there's a good supply of operators that have done several shows and know what they're doing. And then the other thing about the automation operator is operating a show is great until something goes wrong. Then that's where the operator really show what they're made of. Can they deal with problems during the show, and in between shows, can they do the maintenance work? All got to be thought about. Right. During technical rehearsal, there's be plotting time. We need the time to plot the moves, and generally we need the time to plot the moves without lots of other people around. So if you're the production manager, you need to build that into the time scale. That needs to be allowed for, not just something that's worked around or tacked on or not even thought about. It happens and it's annoying. So make sure there's time for the plotting. Some of it can be done offline, some of it can be done on a computer away from the theatre, but we need stage time. Then when we get past the dry tech and you're bringing the actors onto the stage, well then the actors need to be introduced to the stage and the automation, the bits that are going to move, because quite literally the ground can be taken from under their feet. They need to know what's moving, when it's likely to move, where they can stand, where they can't stand, etc. And they need to be rehearsed in all of that. And then we get to the opening night. A lot of production managers like us to be there on the first night just to make sure that there's no problems. That's fine by us, we're quite happy to be there. It's fine by all the other automation suppliers, as far as I know, it's quite normal. But after that, generally the crew will be left to get on with it. Automation systems are quite reliable overall. Sometimes computers get a bad rep. Usually they're just like the reporter, they're just showing you what the problem is or telling you what the problem is as a logical response to something else that's gone on. So, you know, a motor's got stuck because a hairpin's dropped down a track or something mechanical has occurred, and the motor trips out and the computer flashes up saying it's all gone horribly wrong. And sometimes it's the computer that gets the blame when in fact the computer is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's telling you what the problem is. So you need to be able to recognise what is a genuine computer problem and when a computer is telling you that there's something wrong externally with the system. So this leads on to the possible show stops and how you're going to get around that. Does the whole show need to stop? Can you work around it? Have you got contingency in plan? All of that sort of stuff. You need to know what you're going to do if the automation is going to fail on you, because it's not like a light bulb going out on lighting. This can be a bit more serious. Right, the next thing I'm going to talk about is safety. Safety is there's an increased hazard potential, if you like, around automation. So everybody, as I was just explaining, needs to know the hazards, because literally the ground can be taken away from you. Also there's performer flying safety. If you're flying performers, you always need a method of getting them down should the automation fail. You can't have an actor dangling in the air for whilst you're all trying to work out how you're going to get them down. That needs to have been thought about before it happens, not after. And it could be as simple as a ladder or a genie or whatever, but you just need a plan and it needs to be in place before you start. Risk assessments. Now with automation systems, I do what's called a formal risk assessment. So it's actually a mathematical model of working out what could go wrong, the hazards presented if something goes wrong, and what I'm going to do about it to prevent them either from going wrong or what the mitigating circumstances are, and design it out of the system generally. So this could be things like safe edge on elevators that are passing each other, that if nothing was put in place could take someone's foot off if they were to get the scissor action as the elevators go past each other, so we would fit safe edge for that. There could be light beams. Emergency stop system is nearly always involved with stage automation, so that if something's about to go wrong, the operator or someone else around the stage can hit the e-stop and everything stops. Obviously there's things flying in over your head, and during the performance the operators can't be wearing, you know, yellow vests and hard hats and all the rest of it, so they need to be rehearsed to make sure they're standing in the right place. The operator needs to be watching them to make sure they're standing in the right place, so that when they fly in a piece of scenery they're not going to come down and land on someone's head. All of the safety systems, they need to be tested, they need to be commissioned, they need testing on before the show. Part of your rig checks should be to check all your safety systems are working. There should be closed circuit TV, especially if there's some of the scenery is moving in the dark. You can have infrared CCTV, so the operator can still see what's happening. But the operator, at the same time as watching everything that's going on the screen and on his monitor, needs to be watching what's happening on the stage as well. because this is not a computer game. They need to see what's going on. And if the operator's not happy, it's got to be prepared to say, no, I'm not going to press the go button. It's not safe. And that is an important thing. And you know, you can have a discussion afterwards about why that was the case. But they've got to always be not afraid to not push the go button if they're not completely happy that it's safe to do so. And all of this all of this requires good communication between, you know, the operator, stage management, actors, and everybody else has got an interest in the safety of everyone on stage. Okay, last thing I'm going to talk about on this part of the presentation is the future of stage automation, where it's going. Before I talk about the future, I'll talk about the past perhaps. When I very first started in this business, computers weren't used for automation. It was push buttons, it was levers, and the operators had to be rehearsed in all the moves as much as any of the actors or anybody else. They had to know when to push which button, what speed, etc., where to drive it to. They were watching numbers on screens, all this sort of thing. And then it was the introduction of computers that made automation as we know it now possible. I think in the future, I think things will get more standardised. At the moment, the different automation operators, different automation companies, sorry, have their own different systems, and they work in different ways. They use different hardware, different communication protocols, and that's partly because we're taking our equipment from general industry. It's the bottling plants, it's car manufacturing, it's food manufacturing, it's the oil and gas. They're the big users of automation. Theatre is just a tiny, tiny, small part of the automation market, and so we get our lead from them. And theatre automation on its own isn't really big enough to set up whole new protocols, etc., and hardware, etc. I think as the cost of automation is coming down, and it is coming down, believe it or not, as the cost comes down and continues to come down, you'll see automation on quite modest shows. In fact, we're already seeing it, to be honest. Again, when I very first started in this, it was only the big shows that had automation, and the big opera houses, etc. Now, quite modest touring shows have got some automation. You know, certainly revolves and all the rest of it is quite common now, and I think we'll see more of that. The other part of how automation is going, or theatre generally, is it's become a much more cinematic experience over the last 30 years, and the audience want to see scene changes taking place in front of them, and that's rather than curtain coming down, shuffle, 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 curtain back up, carry on. So nowadays it's quite normal to sort of, you don't see the curtain until the halfway mark. So a lot of scene changes are done using automation now to give this almost cinematic type experience. Another thing for the future, and it's starting now, me talking to you as part of all of this now, is the education and training. It's becoming more mainstream. It's becoming part of syllabus of theatre training colleges and university courses. Engineers are being trained now as in other industries, and they're crossing over into theatre. There are named courses now in stage automation, sadly not in the UK yet, but certainly in the United States they have named stage automation degree courses now. And so it's becoming more mainstream, and I think that will continue. So in the future, I think standardisation will occur eventually. Things will come together more. There'll be more links to lighting and projection. There'll be better offline programming facilities. There'll be, the WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get type programming, more of that coming. So there's more to come. Stage automation hasn't finished evolving yet. So that's the first part of the presentation over with. I hope you've learnt something from this, and in part 2 we'll move on to how automation actually works.